Okay, very quickly before the actual intro, because I didn't really want to mislead people on like the style of video that this is, because it's quite different to what I normally do. This is very unedited. This is a good one to watch in the background. I know it's quite a long video, but I've timestamped everything so it's easy to move around, but it's kind of just a lot of blabbing and lip flapping about just unarranged thoughts that I have. It's that style of video. Okay, back to the actual intro. Hey, I hope you're all doing well. I want to start this off by saying that there have been so many changes in this blog post that I don't think I'm ever going to get around to talking about every build I want to make before interest in the game drops off. That's why I'm making this video, because if I don't get round to a build before player numbers do eventually start to drop down, it would have been a cardinal sin on my part to not have at least mentioned the ideas I've got. So this is going to be every single TheoryCraft build I've got planned. Couple things first though. I'm only going to be talking about new stuff or abilities and exotics that have drastically changed so much that they're essentially new. Take for example Raiden Flux. It got really nice buffs, but those buffs just make it more of what it was before, and your builds using Raiden don't change that much. So I don't think it's really worth the amount of time to talk about it when it's essentially just the thing it was before, but a bit better. The builds I am talking about have got to be using new stuff, and that new stuff has to be the focal point of the build for it to be shown off. I really want to give you new things rather than just rehashes of old builds with like a new thing kind of just thrown in as like an addition. The second thing, I am also going to assume that you have read this blog post, or at least listen to someone talking about this blog post. I'm not going to go over everything that they have talked about here because this video would just go on forever. Rather, I'm working off the assumption that you know a lot of what they have talked about. And also, from this point onwards, I'm going off script. Everything I've just said was like loosely scripted, but everything from here on out is just me spitballing with some notes. So without further ado, the builds I have in mind for Hunter. I'm going to start with Void Hunter. The first one is going to be Graviton Forfeit with either Vanishing Step, On the Prowl, or Stylish Executioner, with Phantom Surge or Gambler's Dodge. The reason why I am coming back to this exotic is because when Bungie was showing the clips off of Phantom Surge, and also when they talked about it in the blog post, they mentioned that whenever you get a final blow, you get a 50% melee refund for Phantom Surge. Obviously, it's not like the live update yet. We don't know like specific details on this. So all I know is that at a baseline, one kill gives you 50%. Whether that scales with melee stat, whether that increases if you say kill more enemies, I don't know. But the big thing is that it just gives you 50% more melee energy. And why I think that is important, or something that plays off Graviton Forfeit really well, is that when I was putting together the Graviton Forfeit build that's up on the channel, I didn't say it in the video, but one of like the gripes I had, one of the irks, is that the fact that you got bonus melee energy from Graviton's Forfeit perk, it never really mattered, because at the same time you also got class ability energy, and by the time your melee was fully charged, your dodge would have been fully charged well before it. And assuming that you're using gamblers and then you just dodge, you get a melee charge back anyway. So the fact that you have melee energy or bonus melee energy, it didn't really matter in the build. But if you're now able to get a 50% melee refund, I can only imagine that you're going to be in a position where if Graviton's perk is working, you're going to have your full melee charge, probably before you have your dodge charge back, which is so nice. I should probably have explained Graviton's perk before explaining that bit. Whenever you go invis, you get a stack of Vanishing Shadow, and Vanishing Shadow stacks up to 3 times. When you're at 3, you get 15 HP Void Overshield, I'm pretty sure. And for every stack that you have, you get grenade and melee regen and bonus class regen. I think it's 500% at 3 stacks. Which, you know, let's be honest, that's the part which really matters because you're always aiming to be at 3 stacks. But 500% additional melee energy, I honestly reckon, is going to put you at a point where the melee recharges before the dodge, which is really nice. Phantom Surge also gives you Void Overshield on hit, and I think it gives you more Void Overshield on kill too. What those values are, I'm not sure. Maybe it's like a 22 HP overshield on hits, and then it's like at 45 HP overshield on landing a kill. I don't know. These are things I'm going to have to test. But this is going to be like a very, very survivable build, just because from Graviton's effect, you get Void Overshield for going invis when you have 3 stacks of Vanishing Shadow, and when you have Phantom Surge, just for landing hits, you get Void Overshield. And assuming that these abilities are going to be coming back really quickly from the 500% grenade and melee regen and 200% class ability regen, which is going to then be gamblers, so we'll give you back more Phantom Surges as well. You're going to be hitting a lot of enemies with Phantom Surge. That's going to turn into a lot of Void Overshield. This is also just fully ignoring any of the aspects in the build, which are all going to be ones which give you invis. For the same reasons that I gave in the last Graviton forfeit video, exact same reasons here, in that these are all kind of powerful invis effects. Stylish Executioner is going to be your most consistent one if you have got enemies to kill. On the Prowl is kind of a nice one, but it's also just received a buff that you don't actually have to be invisible for this to select an enemy. Just so long as like there are enemies near, after a little time it's just going to pick one out, and then that's the enemy that you single out. And then Vanishing Step, again for the exact same reasons I mentioned in that last video, it's a way to give you invis, which at 3 times Vanishing Shadow is also Void Overshield, without it being tied to killing enemies, which is really nice. That makes your survivability a lot better when, say, there's something like a champ that you have to kill. Obviously those are healthier enemies. You don't just get to kill them as easily as you would like a red bar. So that's going to be nice. Where these aspects differ, though, from the Graviton build before, is that Phantom Surge has unique interactions with On the Prowl and Stylish. I suppose like a unique interaction with On the Prowl, but just combos really well with the effect of Stylish. You deal, and in Bungie's words, significantly increased damage to targets marked by On the Prowl. Bungie is very particular with their wording. Really, really particular. So, significantly increased damage, that makes me think this is in the ballpark of like a 300% melee damage boost. Honestly, wouldn't surprise me if it is like around there, because they don't use words like that often, and it makes me think that it's going to be like a big, big damage bump. On top of the fact that you also deal increased damage to void debuff targets, On the Prowl triggers like a snare bomb effect, which is going to weaken enemies. So then you could literally just like find an On the Prowl marked target, Phantom Surge in, you kill them, you go through the smoke that makes you invis, and then anything that's left over that is still in the smoke, you can then do like Gambler's Dodge, Phantom Surge back into them. They're a weakened enemy, and it's going to be chunking them for a lot of damage. Stylish Executioner, though, whenever you leave invis, and the action that you do out of leaving invis is a melee, it damage buffs it by 300%, and that melee will now also weaken. I probably don't have to describe why that's good in a melee-centric build, but this is going to be like another way to really just chunk enemies. I think Graviton's just going to be like a very consistent, all-round build. It's going to use Phantom Surge really well. It's going to be able to keep you very healthy through the overshield from lots of Phantom Surges and lots of Vanishing Shadow 3 times Void Overshield. That's going to be a good one. The next build, though, is one that I am genuinely so excited to do. In fact, I think this alongside a Solar Hunter build, I'm going to bundle in as kind of like one build video, because on paper, what it does sounds extremely, extremely good. And that is going to be Speedloader Slacks with Trapper's Ambush and Vanishing Step. I do want to kind of like test still a little bit with Stylish Executioner and On the Prowl, but at the minute, I think Trapper's Vanishing is going to be the one that's like really got my interest peaked because of how it all interacts. Again, I know I've said I want you to read the blog post before watching this video, but I will quickly describe what they've done to Trapper's Ambush because it's the core part of this build. The effect of it has now been moved over to your class ability. It's no longer to your melee. So whenever you do your air move, it's not the melee that goes, it's the class. But now, whenever you dive to the ground, you damage targets on hits. That kind of is unchanged from before in that you deal damage, but this damage is like massively increased. When they were showing it in the footage, it was like one-shotting a lot of the enemies that it was hitting, which is good. And they gave it like a VFX as well update, and they put it so that you like bring a spectral blade down into the ground. It just, the thing looks looks seriously cool. But whenever you damage any enemies, you go to the ground, you do damage, and the damage is massively increased if you have any like void buff on you. That could be invis, that could be overshield, or that could be devour. And whenever you deal damage to an enemy with this, it's then going to heal you. And if you kill an enemy with this, it gives you devour. If you have watched the Many Ways to Yeehaw video, you've seen the Speedloader setup that I had there. It applies essentially in the exact same way here. Almost identically, in that if you're using Lord of Wolves alongside Speedloaders and alongside a charge bolt crossbow as well, the regen that you get is like ridiculous. It's the fastest class abilities you can get in the game. I know people are probably going to be looking at a lot of Hunter's class stuff and be thinking like 6th Coyote or be thinking Radiant Dance Machines. I just objectively think that this is the better way to do it, because it completely removes the ability of kills required in order to get the gameplay loop. I'm going to probably show some footage of what this looks like at the minute with Trapper's Ambush. And, you know, that's the only part that really matters. But you kind of see what like a Trapper's Ambush combo loop looks like when used alongside Speedloaders. Extremely spammy. Just that you have to kind of use your imagination here and imagine that your class ability is now being used, and that is dealing a lot of damage, and every time you hit an enemy with that, that's also healing you. But the really cool part of this build is that because it's no longer tied to your melee, that frees you up to use Phantom Surge, which means that you can kind of dive to the ground, and Trapper's Ambush now also fully inherits the effect of your dodge because it's tied to the class ability. So you're going to be using Gambler's Dodge, and then you kind of Phantom Surge into your enemies. And again, because Phantom Surge is Void Overshield on a hit, it's going to be a really consistent way to sustain health. On top of the fact that whenever you just hit enemies with Trapper's Ambush, that's also going to be a just heal for you. And again, any kills are devour, but say if you were looking at like a boss or a champ, the ability to just heal from an ability against them for free, extremely powerful. Really, really, really powerful. So with Trapper's Ambush as well, they've made it so that the weakened portion of it is kind of still in effect if you're using Vanishing Step. If I pull up the words that they used here, give me a second, I'm having a quick look through the doc. Yeah, okay. Casting it... hold on, where's the part I actually care about? Yeah, casting it while invisible will refresh your invisibility when you hit the ground, and it retains its previous smoke cloud behavior when paired with the Vanishing Step aspect. Why that is so good, why that is so good for this build, is that when you hit the ground, the obvious like next action that you take because you have just used Gambler's Dodge and you now have a melee is to then Phantom Surge in. Because you still get the smoke effect, that means that any enemies you've just Trapper's Ambush down onto are going to be weakened. Weaken, Void Debuff, Phantom Surge deals significantly increased damage. Again, we don't know how much that is. That's something I'm going to have to test against Void Debuffed enemies. On top of the fact that these enemies are weakened, so it's just the regular 15% damage boost. Or like they take 15% increased damage. So this is not only going to be a really tanky combo loop, but it's also going to be extremely lethal. In the moment that you land, you're following up with just this like massive melee chunk. This is a build I am so excited for. And I do kind of want to test this with Stylish Executioner and On the Prowl, but I really do think that Trappers with Vanishing Step is going to be the way to do it. Like, you go down, you deal loads of damage, you heal, you get Devour if you kill anything, and then the moment that you do that, you've then dropped the Smoke Cloud from Vanishing Step, and you then Phantom Surge in, you deal a load of bonus damage to everything else. You go, you deal damage with your weapons, you recharge your class, and then you just rinse and repeat that combo loop. And as well, because Trapper's Ambush is now tied to your class ability, that means if you're able to spam this, you're going to be able to use a setup like Double Dynamo, Triple Distribution, which I absolutely adore doing, which means that you can also make this a really super spam heavy build, and alongside something like Tether, you can, Mobius Tether, the one where you can fire off volleys, that means that you're also going to be able to get a load of extra damage inside of that combo. Like the 30%, wait, no, is it 35% weaken? I think it's 35% weaken that Tether now gives. I'm pretty sure they buffed it. Anyway, that, but then alongside like all the damage that it's just going to be such like a potent build. I cannot wait to put this one together. And it kind of leads on quite nicely because essentially the exact same thing that we are doing with this Speedloaders build is what I want to do on Solar Hunter with Crackshot, and then either On Your Mark or Gunpowder Gamble with Gambler's Dodge. Again, exact same kind of loop of before in that Lord of Wolves is an amazing enabler of Speedloaders, and so are crossbows. If you've seen the Many Ways to Yeehaw, this is essentially that final Speedloaders build from that video, just that we're switching some stuff up to make it so that the dodge is using Crackshot. Crackshot is like you kind of look at enemies, they get like little targets around them, and then when you use your class ability, you fire off like a couple golden gun shots that deals damage. Sorry, if you hit 3 times with Crackshot, you then cure. That's kind of what's going on there. They've also changed it so that On Your Mark, whenever you reach 10 stacks, is no longer giving you Cure, but it is giving you Restoration ×1. That's kind of like a little change. Again, the entire combo loop I am imagining is going to be the same. You throw out a melee, and you then... Yeah, Fan of Knives is the best one to use just because it applies a lot of Scorch. And then you're going to immediately Crackshot, and that is going to then apply Scorch, because this ability scorches. And then that's an ignition. And then you're going to use Lord of Wolves and your crossbow to give back class ability energy. The only thing that I don't know about with this build, because I don't think they mentioned it in the blog post, is whether Crackshot is going to be functioning as like a marksman's dodge, gambler's dodge. If it does, this just means that the build is going to be a lot more melee heavy. But yeah, I don't know. Again, this is something that I'm going to have to test. But because Crackshot on landing 3 hits gives you Cure, that means that just from your class ability, you have a way to sustain yourself again. Which is really why I want to toy around with either On Your Mark or Gunpowder Gamble. Because if I am finding I'm struggling with survivability, On Your Mark is then kind of like the obvious pick to go for, because it's going to give you Restoration ×1 whenever you land precision hits, and you can land a lot of precision hits with Lord of Wolves and your Primo. And yeah, that's kind of what it's going to be doing. But if it turns out that I can go into endgame content and I don't need to be relying that much on Your Mark in order to give Restoration, then 100% I'm going to go with GPG, and you are going to get this like really, really ignition heavy playstyle. So you're just going to have this really cool gameplay loop of like, you Crackshot, you throw knives, you get GPGs, or you get Restoration from On Your Mark, and then you send a crossbow shot off, you use Lord of Wolves, you then get Crackshot again, and then you hip fire. That's going to cure you. And on top of all of this, they've also made it so that class stat over 100 is damage buffing abilities like this. That also goes for the Trapper's Ambush build from before. But I think it's also still going to be giving you that overshield, which is what made the Speedloaders build in the Yeehaw video, the Many Ways to Yeehaw, so good. So yeah, I imagine this is going to be a really powerful setup. And again, dynamo distribution here, I've got to assume that it's going to work because it's like using a class ability. And there were some patch notes or like changes that they mentioned in the blog post where they were saying like now functions as a class ability for something like Ensnaring Slam, for example. So I'm going to assume the same here. But again, one I'm just going to have to test. Next on the list, we have got Sage Protector, Shatter Grenade, Stasis Hunter with Touch of Winter, and Grim Harvest. Going into this, I just want to say, I am looking at Sage Protector here as a way to give back grenade energy. But with the amount of armor sets releasing, it would not surprise me in the slightest if they bring, like, an armor set that gives you grenade energy back really quickly. I'm only saying Sage Protector now because it's the only armor set that I know gives you back really fast grenades. But if they just released an armor set that is like very grenade focused, think of that over Sage Protector. Again, this is like speculative, it's theory crafting, we just don't know. But they have mentioned, put up the Shatter Grenade on screen. It's kind of like you stick it to a target and it freezes them and then releases like a load of like shatter projectiles. It looks to be a pretty high damage grenade, which is really nice because if we can spam that a lot, that's good. That's good for you and me. One thing as well, they've reworked your harvest aspects so that it's now kind of working around stasis shards being made around whenever you shatter a stasis crystal or a frozen enemy, or whenever you kill a slowed or frozen enemy. And then for hunters, I think it's just whenever you have frost armor and when you take damage, you now get ability energy back, which is going to be class ability for hunters. The big question that I have, because they didn't mention it in the patch notes, is whether your harvest aspects are still getting the HP on shard pickup. That is something that I think makes or breaks this build, and it's really annoying because they didn't mention it, so I don't know. I'm genuinely guessing when I say that you're still going to be able to get 10 HP whenever you pick up a stasis shard. I really hope so. It's been a core part of stasis, just stasis builds in general for so long, so yeah. But it's going to be a really cool loop just because I don't think this build has got like as much interaction stuff as the others. But it's just going to be you spam a lot of grenades, and with Touch of Winter as well, they've mentioned that this is going to be buffing your Shatter Grenade in an undisclosed way. They haven't mentioned it yet, how it's going to work. So yeah, I can just imagine Shatter Grenade, but better. I really hope it's like an impactful one that they've done, because some of the Touch of Winter stuff in the past is like a bit of a nothing burger effect. Like you get an extra stasis crystal on your Glacier Grenade. You make a stasis crystal in the middle of your Duskfield Grenade. The only one which I'd say like really big time changes it is Cold Snap, which then like spawns extra Seekers when it hits an enemy. So I'm hoping this is going to be good. But yeah, that's kind of like an idea that I have. I'm not going to spend too long talking about this because there's kind of like a lot of what ifs about the grenade that we just don't know. And the last one for hunters is Shinobu's Vow Hunter. I'm currently theory crafting two different ideas for this one because I think Sage Protector could work well here. But I also think that a Tempest Strike kind of build would also work quite well. I'll kind of get round to why I'm thinking those two things in particular. And it's because the changes that Bungie made to this exotic is that they moved the ability to get grenade ability energy before it was just on hits. Now, whenever Skip Grenade damages, it gives you stacks of Bolt Charge, and whenever you gain Bolt Charge, you then get Skip Grenade energy. So you kind of throw them out, you get Bolt Charge, and then whenever you get Bolt Charge, you get energy back. Whenever you gain full Bolt Charge, you're going to heal yourself and allies, and then you're going to get an enhanced Skip Grenade, where you get an extra 2 bounces on the grenade, and every single time it does one of those extra bounces, you release other Skip Grenades off. The one thing which I'm kind of questioning here is enhanced Skip Grenade, it's that part. Whether it's kind of like, oh, we're going to give you another Skip Grenade charge, which is enhanced, or if it's kind of like your next Skip Grenade has these bonus effects on it. I'm not too sure. Obviously, if it's the latter and you get another charge, that's going to be like really, really good. But the kind of big question that I was asking when I was looking at this is, okay, what are the ways I can make loads of Bolt Charge? That is why I'm looking at either Sage Protector or I'm looking at Tempest Strike. With Tempest Strike, whenever you kill a jolted enemy, you gain Bolt Charge, and obviously the melee itself jolts. So you'll just be using that with Combination Blow, and just doing that kind of like Tempest Strike dodge gameplay loop, and then you'll be getting a lot of Bolt Charge, which then means a lot of grenades. So I think it would be good in that way. Tempest Strike is also really good at making orbs from triple heavy-handed. So you could potentially kind of run something like the grenade finisher on your class item, so that you've got a way to kind of like cheat out grenades by all the orbs that you make from killing enemies with triple heavy-handed and Tempest Strike. The other way that I'm looking at making lots of grenades is through Sage Protector and Praxic Blade, mainly because Spark of Frequency, Praxic Blade with Impact Core is probably one of the most consistent ways that you're able to just make Bolt Charge happen. It is like ridiculously easy to just get Bolt Charge. You do light, 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 heavy, and that is like a full Bolt Charge. And now you got to also consider that that is going to be healing you and allies, and then also just enhancing your skip grenade. So if you're using Sage Protector, in my brain, what I'm imagining is that you prep it, like you block, get Sage Protector, and then you do light, 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 heavy. And I'm going to assume that from just Sage Protector's regen, and then also the Bolt Charge regen, that is then going to make at least a grenade charge, at which point you can just kind of throw it and loop it. And that's just going to be healing you, and you can get loads of grenades out. You could maybe even run this with something like Ascension to jolt enemies, but in every single version of this skip grenade build, you're going to be using Spark of Shock. It'd be like the one fragment and frequency, where it's like guaranteed that you're going to be running those. Yeah, this is one that I do want to test with, but it's one that I'm keeping it in mind because it has the potential to do some really cool stuff. Healing in arc builds with Amplified, it just sounds really nice, and it sounds quite ability spam heavy, which is normally my kind of preference for a build. Okay, and now moving on to Warlocks. I'm going to start with Soul Siphon because to me this is by far the coolest thing, like the coolest builds I think I'm going to be able to make with Warlock. And the builds that I'm going to be talking about are Soul Siphon builds. They are ones that are entirely focused around using Soul Siphon as much as possible. Not kind of just like builds where Soul Siphon is there. These are like through and through Soul Siphon builds. Now, I'm going to run some clips of Soul Siphon in the background that Bungie have put out, but they mentioned a couple things which are really important. They showed it off, and they also mentioned it inside of the blog post. The first thing is that you don't have to land a melee kill. If all you have seen is the clips that Bungie released, then you might think that this is a melee that has to land a kill. It doesn't. It just has to land a hit, and then after you land the melee hit, you can then use Soul Siphon. And whenever you use Soul Siphon, you deal damage, and really importantly, this is the wording that they use inside of the blog post, to all enemies in front of you. So again, in the clip, you see them only do this against 3 enemies, but from what they say in the blog post, I'm assuming that if this was to be done in front of 20 enemies, it's going to chain out to 20 enemies, which is going to be really, really nice. And then as you drain enemies, you get passive Void Overshield building up on you. And annoyingly, we don't see this inside of the footage that I'm showing on screen, but this also is going to be kind of pulling class ability energy from your enemies. So we don't see that, which is annoying because it kind of isn't letting me fully say like, oh, I think Child of the Old Gods is going to be like a really good pick here, because I just don't know how impactful that class ability portion of Soul Siphon is going to be. One thing though, which I think is going to be really nice with Soul Siphon, is if you've got a keen eye and you've been looking at the damage numbers in this clip, you'll see that it starts off quite low, but then as you kind of get towards the end of the siphon of the enemies, the damage just starts to like really ratchet up. I think it gets as high as like 100 at one point, which is really nice. It makes, in my mind, think that this is going to be quite a high damage ability, which is going to be very cool. One thing that really has my attention with Soul Siphon is that assuming that you can keep melee charges high, this is a way to get on-demand Void Overshield and have it not be tied to kills, which is really nice because one of the problems, I suppose not problems, but one of the things which Void Warlock never really did that well was being able to stack up Void Overshield on itself and therefore be able to stand in front of like a boss and tank damage. That's something it couldn't do. Obviously with Feed the Void and the Enhanced Devour, it's amazing whenever you're in ad dense areas, and this obviously is going to be really good also when it's ad dense because it hits all the enemies in front of you. But it just means that, say if you're just like draining one enemy, that's still going to be a way to get Void Overshield on yourself, which I think is going to be very, very potent. Another assumption that I'm going to make with Soul Siphon is that every time a tendril goes out and either hits or kills an enemy, that is going to count as an individual kill. I also think that just because this is in the melee section, and they also mention as much in the blog post saying like, oh, this will have good synergy with certain melee exotics, that this is going to work with stuff like heavy-handed, for example, and melee exotics. I'm going to come around to those in a second. So with that, I think the way that you're going to want to run this is always, obviously you're going to have to use Soul Siphon as an aspect, but either with Child of the Old Gods or Feed the Void. Again, I'm going to recommend Child of the Old Gods only if that class ability portion that you have from Soul Siphon is genuinely quite impactful. If it isn't, I am not putting like as many I'm not going to put like as much priority in Child of the Old Gods and just go for Feed the Void because of how good its Devour is. But if that class portion is really good, Child of the Old Gods is probably what I'm going to be recommending here. Another thing which I think is worth mentioning is Echo of Provision with Child of the Old Gods. I do need to test this, I'm not 100% sure how it works, but this is, or at least the fragment says whenever you deal grenade damage, you get melee energy back. If this has synergy with Child of the Old Gods, I haven't tested it, so I don't know. If you do know, then you can comment below and let me know. But yeah, if you're able to just have this passively draining against an enemy and be getting melee energy back, obviously that is just like really, really good synergy with Soul Siphon. As for the exotics that I think are going to pair really well, I'm going to give an honourable mention to Karnstein's in that whenever you land melee kills, you're going to get Cure ×2 and Restoration ×1, and whenever you land a finisher, it's Resto ×2 and Cure ×3. This is a melee build, so I think it's going to use Karnstein's well, but that overlap between healing effects, I just don't know if it's going to be really needed. So yeah, it's one that I think whenever I get round to Soul Siphon, I might kind of just be like, it does work with Karnstein's, but whether you want to run it with Karnstein's, that's really up to you. There are, though, 4 exotics which really do catch my eye along with Soul Siphon, one of which has kind of like been, or at least received a new effect to directly work with Soul Siphon, and that's Nezarexin. It's got all the effects that it had before. Your Void kills still give you Abyssal Extractors, I think was the name of the buff, and you get like 2.5 seconds per Void kills that you get, and then whilst that's active, you get 300% increase grenade and melee regen, and 200% class and super regen. On top of the fact that it got a new effect tied to it, is that anything that you deal damage to with Soul Siphon then becomes suppressed, and whenever you kill a suppressed enemy or kill them with Soul Siphon, you get an additional 1.5 seconds to Abyssal Extractors. This is going to pair up really nicely. This is one where I'm going to be like definitively the way that you want to run it is Soul Siphon, Child of the Old Gods, because they've also made it so that Child now also suppresses enemies when it kind of goes out and starts damaging enemies. So just for killing like a couple enemies, if you do that with Soul Siphon and Child of the Old Gods, you're going to get some really good uptime on Abyssal Extractors, which is, I think, the name of the perk. But it's just going to make it so that you're not going to have to kill that many enemies, and you're going to instantly be really, really high on the Nezarexin buff, which is going to be really nice. Again, Child of the Old Gods and Soul Siphon, I think, are going to be the obvious options there, with all of that just giving you even more melee regen rate. Child of the Old Gods with Healing Rift, giving you grenade and melee energy whilst it just drains stuff. I think that's going to be a really, really nice combo. three, though, which I am really, really excited to test, are Necrotics, Fellwinters, and Winterskull. With Necrotics, I'm assuming that every single time one of your tendrils goes out and hits an enemy, that is then going to be a poison application. And if you've used Necrotics in the past, then you know exactly why that's so good, because if you're able to chain this to all of the enemies in front of you, and then just say kill one of them with something like a Thorn, or with, the name isn't coming to me, Necrochasm, with Necrochasm, then you're just going to have off of this one melee, this just like massive burst of poison. It's going to be so like chain heavy, and it's going to be so good for when you just need to clear ads out. Fellwinters is another one. Obviously, when you send the... what's the name of just the regular melee? The little void ball out. When you send the void ball out, it's then going to weaken that enemy, and if you kill, then that's going to be disorient. That's kind of like the effect of Fellwinters. But then, when you're able to then follow this up with Soul Siphon and start chaining weaken and disorient among groups of enemies, again, I just think that is going to be a combo that is so, so good. The one, though, which has got my attention the most, but just because I think it's going to be so cool to use, it's really going to fill that fantasy of just like purely being like a massive aggressor and constantly spamming a load of these melees, is Winterskull. With Winterskull, whenever you land melee kills and also glaive kills, you get a stack of... It's Warlord something. You get a stack of Warlord something, and it goes up to 10 stacks, and if you get a finisher, you get 3 stacks of its buff. These are on like a 4.5 second timer, I think, and they decay down one by one. But every single time you land a melee kill with your melee, or your glaive, or with a finisher, you're going to get like a melee damage buff. It starts off, I think, around 60-something%, and then scales all the way up to 300% when you get to 10 stacks. With the really cool part being that when you get to 10 stacks, you then get another melee charge, and then I think for 8 seconds, you get an extra 100% melee damage on top of the 300 that you already get at 10. And your melee regen just like goes down massively, like to the point where you can just spam melees over and over and over. You also get a melee duration buff, I suppose, so that your melees go out quicker. One of the questions that I'm wondering is, whilst I have Warlords, the kind of like 10 times Warlords buff active, does that mean that Soul Siphon is going to go off quicker? If that's the case, awesome. That's going to be so, so cool, because it just means even more Soul Siphons. But then, the big one is whenever I send out a Soul Siphon and each tendril then kills an enemy, I've got to assume that that is going to be counted as a melee kill and then give you a stack of Warlord Sigil. Yeah, sorry, it is Warlord Sigil. Warlord Sigil. The kind of melee damage buff that you get. That's kind of like the big question that I'm asking at the minute, because you can send out your regular melee, then get Soul Siphon prepped, then use it, then send out another melee, get Soul Siphon prepped, then use it, and so long as you have just killed 10 enemies, or even something like 7 enemies, and then just go for a finisher afterwards, you're then going to have the exotic perk ready, which is just like so good. And then as you get towards the end of the kind of like melee spam buff mode, you can just let another 2 charges fill up, just don't use them. And then as soon as it ends, you just go back into the loop and you just rinse and repeat that. I think Winterskull is going to be the coolest way to run this, and it's just going to be so spammy and aggressive. Admittedly, it is a version which is more kill dependent. It really relies on you having enemies to kill. But I think working in maybe something like 1-2 finisher and playing off of the finisher aspect of Winterskull is going to let this be a bit more lenient and thrive a bit more. But that is one that I am really, really interested in. It just sounds like the power fantasy of that sounds so cool. For the next build, it's another Void one, and it is Astrocyte Warlock with either Soul Siphon, Feed the Void, or Child of the Old Gods. The change that this got is that if you were using Blink and you have Astrocyte Verse equipped, you're then able to use Dark Blink just at any moment, no longer just tied to the super. And whenever you use that kind of blink, it goes in like any horizontal direction that you want. It is going to apply volatile to enemies near you and also just give you volatile rounds. To me, if this is anything close to how I'm imagining the Telehunter worked, that was a Mask of Bacchus build I have up on the channel. Really, really cool, like teleporting style of build. I think it's just going to be a really cool power fantasy. And it almost gives me throwbacks to Gearfalcons, which, again, we know that to be a pretty good build. Bearing in mind that volatile rounds also now deal an extra 10% damage to champions, I believe. So yeah, it's going to be, in my mind, a really cool setup where you're just kind of blipping in between enemies. I'm imagining something like this with Slayer's Fang, bearing in mind that is also getting buffs. It just sounds like a really cool playstyle. Now, the last build I have in mind for Warlocks is Mindspun Invocation Strand Warlock with Slicewire Grenade. At the minute, we're waiting to see what the unique interaction it has with Slicewire is, so I'm kind of hesitant to say any other aspects that I want to use apart from Mindspun Invocation, because we know that's the one that buffs the grenade. But I'm assuming it being a new grenade, they're going to have done something cool with it, so I'm thinking that's Mindspun Invocation with Sage Protector. Again, that's just me spitballing and just thinking that Sage Protector is really good at giving grenade regen. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with that at the minute. I'm not going to spend long on this because it is so speculative. We just don't know how it's going to work. So yeah, that's one that I've got my eye on, and if it has a really cool effect, that is one that I'm definitely going to start building with. And now, on to Titans. For your first build, I'm going to be looking at Shieldburst. For what it does, it enhances, at least per the blog post, enhances your equipped barricade. With Towering Barricade, you're able to kind of like send the barricade forward and then it's going to stop. And it kind of gives you like a way to like safely move up into enemies. And with Rally Barricade, it lets you stand behind it and then you get Scorching Rounds to your weapons, or your solar and kinetic weapons. And your allies also get Scorching Rounds too. The part that I'm building into a lot more is that you can then use your class ability again and you can kind of detonate your barricade, and it's going to just send out this like big wave of damage which is going to scorch anything that gets caught in that explosion. And whilst the barricade is up, when you deal damage you kind of increase the power of this blast. This, from the blog post, they have said is able to be damage buffed by Roaring Flames. However, this kind of introduces a problem, I think, in that obviously you have to run Shieldburst because it's the aspect, so you've got to run it. And then you're going to want to run this with Roaring Flames so that you're able to damage boost your barricade. That's obviously something that I think is quite important. Which leaves you in a position where you don't then have Sol Invictus, so you don't have a way to get Restoration. For the longest time, one of like the irks I had with Solar Hunter is that how you got Restoration was just Ember of Empyrean and Healing Grenade. And if you're using Shieldburst and Roaring Flames, it puts you in that position where you're having to rely on Healing Grenade in order to get Restoration. And then it kind of makes your grenades in the build alongside Roaring Flames feel kind of redundant, which I didn't like. So when I was flicking through my list, an exotic which obviously people know before, it's definitely had its time in the spotlight, but I think it's going to pair up really well here, is Loreley. Whenever you drop your barricade, or whenever you have your barricade charged and you get down to critical health, this is going to spawn a sunspot under you, but really importantly, this is a Sol Invictus sunspot, so it's going to give you Restoration, which means that you've got a way to then get Restoration in the build without having to use the aspect, but also be able to use Shieldburst and Roaring Flames. So you're not compromising on losing out on the damage of Roaring Flames, and obviously then just having Shieldburst, but still able to get Restoration and run a grenade then, which is nice because obviously then it has synergy with Roaring Flames. What I want to then pair up with this, and I think it is probably going to be the best armor set, even if they do introduce some really good armor sets, just because I know it's going to work well, kind of buffing every aspect of this kit, is Sage Protector. In my mind, you kind of drop the barricade, you throw the grenade, which is then going to deal damage, you then prep Sage Protector, detonate your barricade, and then you're just going to get barricade energy back, and you're kind of going to be able to send out a load of barricades, and then just almost just like explode waves in front of you. Bearing in mind, every single time you do this, you're getting restoration from Loreley. So it's a really nice way for you to kind of claw back survivability from using Shieldburst and Roaring Flames by having restoration. I think this is going to be really, really cool. And bearing in mind that the barricade also has a kind of taunt effect to it, and you're also able to kind of use it as a way to send the barricade forward, and then you're able to use that as cover to get in close to enemies, as in to get in sword distance, and then get Sage Protector going. I think this is going to come together as a really, really cool build. And then the second build I have is Praxic Vestment Titan. This thing got some absolutely massive buffs. The melee damage that it deals got buffed by 500%. In the blog, they put Big Slam underneath it, so I'm going to assume that this is hitting like a decently hard melee. But they also just made it so that you get the jetpack use quicker. You get more fuel from weapon kills, up to 20% from 10, and you get more fuel from melee kills, up to 50% from 35. But the big thing that they did is that they changed it so that the exotic perk now recognizes knockout as powered melee kills. So you're able to just use this jetpack so much more. And obviously there are two subclasses which are able to use knockout, and you have that both in Prismatic and obviously in Arc. I think if I'm going Arc, the way to do it would be knockout and Touch of Thunder with pulse grenades, just because it's going to let you, with pulse grenades, make a lot of ionic traces. Those traces can then feed back into your melee, and through that, I think it works quite well. I think there's also an argument here for using Storm's Keep, just because it gives a lot of bulk charge, and bulk charge gives melee energy, but this is one that I'd have to tinker with, but I'm leaning more towards Knockout, Touch of Thunder, Pulse Grenades. I think as a playstyle, that also sounds much more enjoyable, a bit more aggressive and in your face. The other way that you could then use this is also on Prismatic Titan, and there, obviously Knockout, but then what you use after that, I would assume Consecration. Only problem being is that I think something like Inmost Light Synthos or Inmost Light Spirit of Contact is just the de facto better Consecration build. So yeah, I'll just have to see with that too. But this is very much on my list. Praxic Vestment before was kind of like a nothing burger to the point where people didn't use it at all. But now, with these buffs, I consider it to basically like be in the spotlight again, and something that I am very, very keen to build with. Also, it's just like flying through the air and then just like ramming into something. It sounds like such a cool playstyle. And those are all the builds that I've got planned at the minute. Now, I know if you've got to this point, you might be thinking, oh my god, he missed out so much stuff. These are just the things which have like caught my eye the most. Honestly, once I get in game, once I start messing around with stuff, I'm sure this list is going to grow bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Again, there were so many changes that there's just stuff that I've probably missed that, yeah, I really need this stuff to be in the live game so I can test and so I can just tinker and build stuff. Also, if you have got any ideas, anything that you think is quite off meta, niche, anything like that you've been theory crafting so far, feel free to leave it down below. I'm going to be looking at this comment section quite closely, because if there's an idea that jumps and it's something which is really unique and cool and something that people wouldn't have thought of that much, then yeah, go for it. Absolutely leave that down there. For now, that is about it from me though. See ya.